Hello, Tisha.
Hi, Jen. How are you?
Oh, well, the plague has caught up to me. I don't know if it's as bad, but we were recording on Wednesday night and it went long and I was exhausted because I was so busy taking care of one of my kids who was very sick. So we're recording this episode a few days later and in that time I have gotten sick. There's all kinds of fun coughing, respiratory, plaguey things that aren't even COVID
Yeah.
going around our school. I mean, maybe there's some COVID there, but I think most of what I've heard, it's not. So I'm not feeling so hot right now. I'm not gonna lie.
Oh, boo. I'm sorry.
Yeah, I feel like I was just talking with Logan because we've had beautiful weather here for about a week, like unseasonably warm.
Yes.
I think all over like the Northeast. And I was just talking to Logan at bedtime tonight because he's finally good. He's going to school tomorrow. And I was like, we missed all the nice weather, just so you know, like the November nice weather. He was like, really? And I was like, oh yeah. I'm like, you have to wear a coat and hat and gloves tomorrow. And he goes, really? And I said, yep.
It's hat and gloves time, is it?
Well,
Boo.
I mean, Wyatt came in saying he was freezing cold when he was playing outside today.
hmm
I think at least in the morning on the way to school, like they need to have the
It'll be
stuff.
colder. Yeah.
Well, they need to, whether they want to wear it right off the hop or not, they have to.
Yeah. I'm gonna need to get snow pants for my youngest because I I was looking for her like snowsuit and I couldn't find the snow pants. And then finally I kind of said something to her like, Mommy can't find your snow pants. And she says, Oh, yeah, remember they ripped and you threw them out? So I guess I don't even remember, but I guess in the spring they had ripped and I threw them out thinking I'll get her a new pair in the next winter. And so snow is upon us, and I do not yet have these snow pants. So that is on my to do list for sure. I have something I wanted to talk about. I was listening to another podcast, and the topics are kind of a sensitive nature. And I'm listening to this woman talk, and she is talking about how it is that she came to find the courage to come forward about a sexual assault. And as she's talking, all of a sudden, there's an ad for parachute linen sheets. And I'm just like, this is terrible. This is terrible. And I was like, I have to tell Jen about this because it really rang home to me this idea that we had in the beginning when we started this podcast that like we did not want to have advertisements when we're listening to people tell their stories and they're talking about things that are of a sensitive nature and then all of a sudden there's an ad for bed sheets, like seriously.
Yeah.
um or whatever the ad may be. um
There's no appropriate
and I
ad
was like,
there.
there's no appropriate ad, and that's why we don't have ads. But for listeners, it's also why we are always like, hey, join our Patreon, and hey, we have a merch shop, because there are costs involved with running the podcast, and we are independent podcasters, so we are, absorbing those costs ourselves. And that's why we do it. That's why we're, asking you guys to kind of support us in those other ways, because it's it's so schmarmy.
Yeah, it can be really schmarmy. And, if we had the opportunity to partner with the right brands or companies or businesses
For
where
sure.
we could curate how the ads were delivered, I would
And
be open
also,
to
like,
that. But no, right in the middle of some, no, that's not okay. But that's also
right
how
in the
some platforms work. And the problem
absolutely.
is when you're independent, you're trying to make that money wherever you can. And so I'm sure this podcaster just was like, yeah, drop if you have ads from your marketplace to drop in my show, drop them in because I'll make some money without being able to think all of those steps ahead.
Now we are
Um,
talking, and I am looking it up because I do not believe it's an independent podcaster.
oh,
And also, like, you have to think about what are you advertising. So the podcast I don't know if I'm allowed to say. Okay, the
You say
podcast
it.
I was listening to is called Chasing Cosby. And so it's
Okay.
all about like the Bill Cosby, it's
Oh
all
yeah,
about the
yeah.
Bill Cosby case and the stories of the women, whatever. And that's what I was listening to. And I'm like, I'm sorry, am I listening right now to an ad for bed sheets
Yeah, that's gross.
when like it could have been anything, but also it was bed sheets. And we're talking about sexual assault. I was like, this just feels so wrong.
Yeah.
So it's Los Angeles Times
LA
produces it.
Times.
Like,
Do better, LA Times.
what are you
Do
doing?
better.
Do better.
Do
Seriously.
better.
I was, I was, anyways, it just, it hit home for me in the sense that it reminded me why it is that we had made that decision.
Yeah,
And
yeah. It's why we have our Patreon subscription, which is like such a low fee, and the funds that from that directly support the show, and we do the best that we can to provide additional content. You have a evergreen, always there discount on our merch shop through our Patreon. That's why we have Buy Me a Coffee set up so that you can make a one-time donation towards the show. And it's why we have a merch shop, which is the same way of like where you're actually getting something for your donation to the show, contribution to the show. And we might even
yeah,
shout you out here.
yeah.
Speaking of merch shop, I was thinking, because those that follow me or know me know that I do some direct sales. I sell for Beauty Counter, and we're heading into what is like the busiest time of the year for me in that part of my life.
Mm-hmm.
So I was wondering, do we need to have a little Black Friday, Cyber Monday promo for our merch shop?
Ooh,
Would that, my friends, incentivize you to snag some Now What Pod merch? You need to let us know, DM us, email us, thenowwhatpod@gmail.com. Let us know what you would think about a Black Friday Cyber Monday deal on our merch store.
I mean, I might order something.
I know, right? We are so like busy and all over the place that we haven't ordered stuff yet. And I've been meaning to talk to you about getting us an order together, but that's
Yeah,
for
we
when we're not
definitely have to do
recording.
that.
And now we're about to release an episode with the fabulous Annesa.
I loved Annessa's story in the sense that I think that she is a very good storyteller.
Yes.
Not that I love what happened to her, but I think she does a really good job of walking us through her story. And, it's episode 3 of Bad Boyfriend Month.
Well, here's the thing, too. I think there's a misconception when we're like, oh, it's a really good episode.
Yes.
Because we do, we say that all the time. And I think it's because there's like so much good to learn from this person who's gotten vulnerable and shared
Yes.
their story and their learning and their journey with us. It's good in that it's a good listen. Also, I just want to drop in a quick content warning. There is talk of domestic violence in this episode. So if that does not serve you, just take care of yourself. Hi, and welcome back to the Now What Pod. I'm Jen.
And I'm Tisha. Today we are talking with Annesa, and I have to tell you guys, I am so excited to be talking to her. And when we first logged onto the call, I was like, I feel like I'm talking to a celebrity because I've been following her on Instagram for quite some time, and I've been following her story. And she recently shared really great news that I'm hoping she'll get to that part of her story as well. But she is a nurse and survivor and advocate living in Austin, Texas. So welcome, Annesa.
Welcome.
Thank you so much for having me, y'all.
So I'll just let you start telling us your story wherever makes sense for you.
Yeah, of course. So I think my story, and this is obviously because of my amazing therapist, my story really honestly begins just the way that I was raised. I was raised in a very, very conservative Muslim male dominated household. My parents Got an arranged marriage. They have about a 13-year age difference. My mom got married when she was 16. My dad was 29 at the time. That's very normal. I was born in Bangladesh, so that's where they met. And back then, that was very, very normal. And my mom, although she did not want to get married at that age, she had to drop out of high school, basically. And there was this man who had the promise of taking her to America. Her mom was like, this is a great opportunity. You need to accept this proposal. So in essence, they did. She had her first kid at 17 and had me when she was 22. And then our family was complete after that. She kind of skipped her teenage years and went straight to adulthood before she had any time to process any of what her life meant. And, we had a very kind of traditional family where my dad was bringing in all the money. He had kind of all the say in every decision, every financial decision, where they were going, what they were going to do. And my mom was the homemaker. She raised us. My dad was there, but she raised us, right? And so that's kind of the house that I grew up in. And I grew up with always being afraid of my father. Like if there was any consequence, it was, oh my God, your dad is going to be so mad at you. What's going to happen? So I grew up not respecting my dad, but fearing him my entire life. And it wasn't until my teen years when I realized that that wasn't normal. Not everyone just feared their dad.
Right. Because when you're a kid, you just think that whatever your experience is, you think that's what's normal. So you think everybody fears their dad.
Exactly. And it blew my mind.
Yeah, I think that, not just that situation, but so many situations, all of a sudden we become teenagers and develop some autonomy and start visiting our friends' houses and having more conversations about family dynamics. And we start going, oh, so your family does what?
Well, I feel like we spoke with somebody recently, and it's like you only know what's in your own pool, I think is how she put it, right?
Mm-hmm.
And until you like swim in other pools that you realize that, oh, they're not all the same.
Yes, exactly. And I'll be very, very blunt. I grew up, a majority of my life, I grew up in Canada and in North Dakota in America. Mm-hmm. And obviously there's not much diversity in North Dakota. I spent, I think, 16 years of my life in North Dakota. And so it was very isolating for somebody like me to be living in North Dakota. Nobody looked like me. Nobody wanted to talk to me. I was just very isolated. And anytime anyone would talk to me, it'd be more like talk to me about your culture and how you're so different. So I would feel more and more isolated every time people would ask about my culture, because I just wanted to be like everybody else growing up.
Right. And they want to talk about what it is that makes you different.
Exactly. Right. So every little thing had to be about, oh, but how do y'all do it? And I'm like, just got really tired. And I grew up like starting to hate white people straight up.
Yeah. You're like, I don't want to be the spokesperson for brown people.
Exactly. I hated it. And I thought white people were like that everywhere, but it was just that part of town in North Dakota. So I was very isolated. And then I just couldn't get along because I couldn't relate. I had a curfew. I was in college. I had to be home by 10 p.m. every night. And in North Dakota, there's not much to do but to drink. And I didn't drink. So I would hang out with my friends, but then they'd always do something later at night. And I'd just kind of be at home watching Netflix every single night. So it was just very, very isolating. I didn't have people like me. And I feel like because of that, I got into a relationship when I was about 19 years old. It was my first relationship. And I kept it a secret for 3 years from my family. I had a whole life and a whole relationship, and I just kept it a secret from my family. It's because I feared my dad. We never talked about dating. We never talked about relationship. And in Islam, like, you don't date, you just get married. So I feel like a lot of that just set me up for a lot of failure in about how I was going to have a healthy relationship in my life. The only relationship that I was ever close to seeing was that of my parents, and that was completely dominated by my dad, right? So long story short, it's 2017, and I had just broken up with my 3-year boyfriend in secret, and I was going through heartbreak in secret in my room, just crying every night. And I decided, you know what? I'm going to get out there, go on the dating apps, and I'm just going to go wild. So I got on a dating app, and that summer I started dating around. It was a lot of fun. And that's where I met my ex-husband, on the dating apps. So that's kind of where the story starts. We met on a dating app. I had flown to LA for a retreat for Greek life. And he messaged me saying, hey, you're in my town, let's meet up. So I did go ahead and meet up with him. But the way that we met really shows how the story is going to unfold. So, I'm from North Dakota. I didn't know anyone that was brown. And then he was brown. He's Bengali. He checked every list that I had and everything that my parents would ever want in a guy. Like, he checked all the boxes, right?
Right.
I remember I was just like sitting outside waiting for him to pull up in his car, and all of a sudden I hear loud music. He drives up in a Porsche convertible, like hair done, wind in his hair, like perfect music. And I was just so blown away by it. I was just so starstruck.
It sounds very LA.
It's so LA. And I was just like blown away. And I found him so attractive. And I got into his Porsche and I'm like, oh my God, like I'm living the dream right now.
Yeah.
Like this guy from the beginning was telling me the dream from the moment
Yeah.
I saw him, right?
And he's perfect on paper.
Perfect on paper, looks perfect physically, you know? So I'm just like, oh my God, like this is amazing. This is a dream come true. And from the beginning, it was red flag after red flag that I continued to ignore because he was selling the dream to me. And I felt like I could see a future with him because he was also from Bangladesh and stuff like that. And I remember the first conversation we had, he asked me if I was a virgin, like right away. And I was just like, why is that the first thing that we're talking about? But I was just playing along and we were just talking about that. But I found it really alarming that right away he started talking about what I've done sexually and just ended everything about my past and digging into me. And I could already see the double standard because he was saying that he had done all these things, but every time I told him I did something, he was getting a little concerned. But, you know, I brushed it off, and every time I met with him, it was just like he would be promising, like, oh, I could see a future with you, Annesa. Like, this is real. I'm so connected to you. Just love bombing me left and right, nonstop. And me being 21 years old at the time, I'm just like, oh, this is perfect. Like, he's the one. He loves me so much already, you know?
And how old was he?
He's just a year older than me.
Okay.
Yeah, he was just a year older. His family was really well off. They had a lot of money, and my family did not have any money really. And they lived in a big house in San Diego, you know, and we live in a little apartment in North Dakota. So I was constantly just like, wow, like this is exactly what I want out of my life. I was also still living with my parents at the time, right? So I wanted freedom. And I felt like my ticket to freedom was getting married to this guy.
How often did you guys see each other? Was he a secret?
Yeah, so basically we met in LA just like 2 times, and then I flew back to North Dakota. And while I flew back to North Dakota, he was calling me, he was FaceTiming me, and then within 3 weeks, we had decided that he needed to come and meet my parents. This is like super fast. Within 3 weeks, he's like, I see a future with you. I want to move to the next step. I want to meet your parents. I want to be public about this. And I just felt so overwhelmed. Like, you want me? I just felt so special, you know. And another thing, a little key point is that he labeled himself as Muslim, right? And by saying that, like, he had his own version of Islam that he was preaching to me. I think Islam is a very beautiful religion, but I do feel like he had a skewed version of it in a way to control me, in a way to manipulate me, right? So in Islam, you can't be dating, you can't be doing anything physical with anybody outside of your husband, right? So the best thing to do is when you both have the intention to marry, then you go ahead and just get married, and then you date and do all this other stuff, right?
Right.
So he had basically convinced me that in order for us to move in a life without sin, we need to just get married. Like, that's it. That's where we need to start. And at first I was hesitant, but I was trying to also be a good Muslim. And I'm like, you know what? What you're saying sounds right. And I don't think we're doing anything wrong. So you know what? Maybe we should get married. It kind of just like happened like that. He came and visited my family and then just started to force marriage on me, basically, completely brainwashed me into thinking that I wanted to get married too for the sake of God and for the sake of everything that was right.
What did your parents think when they met him? What were their impressions?
They initially didn't like him at all. They felt like, who was he? Why is he trying to do all this all of a sudden? They said, this is too fast. They forbade me to get married to him. They said, absolutely not. They could see right through him. And of course, me being love struck and brainwashed the way that I was, I'm like, you guys are missing the point. Like, he's the one. I started fighting with my parents over this guy that I knew for 1 month. It was just wild. And I think back to that girl and I'm like trying to shake some sense into her. Like, what are you doing? And even talking about this, I'm like gagging. I can't believe I did all this. But yeah, I was fighting daily with my parents, trying to convince them that we need to get married. It was the right thing to do Islamically. I wanted to be a good Muslim girl. And, you know, here is this guy who wants to be with me. What's your problem? You know, day after day, until eventually they just kind of gave in because I caused such a fight.
Did they not want you to go the arranged marriage route, or they just didn't like him?
Honestly, my parents emphasized my education quite a bit. They wanted me to be a little bit more established. They wanted me to get my master's degree and find a good job and then find a good man and then marry him.
Okay.
They thought I was too young. You know, times had changed. They spent 20 years in America already. Their whole arranged marriage mindset was out the window. They came here for a different life, but
Right.
they thought it was too soon. They didn't trust him. They didn't know who he was. And they said, what's the rush? You guys can stay long distance and get to know each other and then get married later. But I wasn't having it. What really put the nail in the coffin was that I made his parents meet my parents over FaceTime. And they actually realized that they had a lot of similarities in the people they knew back in Bangladesh. And that's when my parents were like, oh, they seem like good people. I guess maybe this might work. And hence started the whole getting married stuff. So we had met in August of 2017 and we were married by December of 2017. Like
Wow.
full on married within 5 months of just meeting each other. And if you were to tell me that I would have done that back in like April of 2017, I would have said you're absolutely crazy. I was not ready to get married. I was not in the headspace. I don't feel like I was mature enough, but.
And you had previously dated somebody for 3 years.
Right. So I knew that I wanted to date somebody, but he had completely convinced me to get married. And so we were long distance. He was living in California and I was living in North Dakota throughout this like 5 months. We weren't like constantly seeing each other.
Right.
So when he came to visit my family, we spent a few days together before he met my parents. And I remember during that time, we were driving one day and he was peeking more into like my past and what I had done, like sexually, or how many guys have you kissed and how far have you gotten with all of them, just going deep in. Every time I told him more detail, he was visibly getting angrier and angrier because he wanted a pure girl who was a complete virgin, right? And that wasn't the case for me. And I also did wear a hijab back then. So that's like the head covering for Muslim women.
Yep.
So I was practicing wearing the hijab too. And he kept saying like, I thought you were different because you wore a hijab. Like, I can't believe you've done all this stuff. And regardless of what he's done, I can't believe you've done all this stuff, Annesa.
Right.
And I remember one time he got so angry while we were driving, he hit my steering wheel really hard. And to this day, my steering wheel still is a little dislocated where he hit it. And we were like in the highway. That happened and I just went full blown into a serious panic attack where we had to stop in the middle of the highway and I needed to get out of the car and get air. And like my body was telling me,
yeah,
this is bad.
Yeah.
This is bad. This is wrong. And obviously right after, I'm so sorry, Annesa, I won't lose my temper like that again. And that's kind of what happens with abusive men. They start with yelling and then they start with hitting things around you until they finally start hitting you. So that was kind of like strike one, but he apologized. I tried to run and leave him, but he apologized and eventually got me back with all the promises of our future. Another incident was when I went to visit him in California. This is like in November, a month before we got married. This is where he proposed to me. About 24 hours after he had proposed to me, he was going through my phone and he saw a picture of me and my ex on my graduation day. So it was just a picture of me with him on my graduation day. He saw it. He got super angry, threw my phone, and then shoved me against the window of the car. And this is the first time he had actually put his hands on me.
Right.
And in that instant, I felt like my soul left my body because I had just gotten engaged 24 hours ago. And I had told the entire world already because I was so excited, right?
Right.
And at that moment, I got out of the car. I called an Uber. I was ready to bounce. Like I was ready to leave. I'm like, this doesn't feel right. Everything, my body was screaming, get out, get out. So I called an Uber and I was hiding in the parking lot, like behind a car, right? Waiting for the Uber because I didn't want him to find me. And then, eventually he did find me and kind of forced me into his apartment. And so I had missed my Uber. And in the apartment, he's down on his knees, like, Annesa, I'm so sorry. Like, you're my future wife. I'll never do that again. Just like constantly like begging on his knees, touching my feet, like, please, I'll do anything. So of course, I am just overwhelmed with emotion. I feel like, okay, he really does mean it. I keep looking down at my ring, I'm just like, okay, I'll stay. And then we just sat there and we just prayed about it. I seriously just think back to this and I'm like, oh my God, I tried to run so many times. I really did before it even got awful. But, after that, I was leaving to go back to North Dakota in like 2 days. So I was just like, oh no, I'm going to miss him. And as soon as I left to go back to North Dakota, I had forgiven him. I missed him so much, And the next time I was going to see him was going to be our wedding weekend. We actually did hold our wedding in Austin, Texas. So, now it's like wedding weekend. He came and like we're like planning this like little wedding at this like little venue, and we're just like having the time of our lives. And everything was going magical. It's my wedding weekend and everything. Throughout this process, what nobody else was seeing was the fact that he was severely emotionally blackmailing me, emotionally abusing me, such as he forbade me to have any guy friends. So I had to make sure I deleted all my guy friends from my social media and stopped interacting with them completely. But in return, he had girlfriends that he wouldn't cut contact with. And his reasoning is, you can't trust guys. Okay, so I can't trust guys with you, but you can trust me. I would never cross that boundary with another girl.
But you're a guy.
Right, so you're telling me not to trust you. You're openly telling me not to trust you, but it didn't click in my head.
Right.
Right. And it's that double standard, right? I can have female relationships outside of the marriage, but you cannot have male relationships outside of the marriage.
Exactly. And then stuff like, he would log into all my social media into his phone so that whenever I got a notification, he would too, just so he can keep tabs on who I was talking to. But I wasn't allowed to receive all his social media stuff because he was just looking out for me. He cared so much for me to keep tabs on me like that, right? And that's kind of what I rationalized in my head.
He was protecting you.
So much. He's protecting me from the bad guys out there. I was with the biggest bad guy, but who would have thought, right?
I feel like that's usually how it goes, though. You just don't know until after the fact.
It really is. It was extremely isolating. None of my friends knew what was going on with me. They were just like, okay, if this is really what you want to do, but are you sure? And I'm like, oh, I'm sure. Like, he's the one.
You said you went to LA for something related to Greek life. So you were in a sorority.
Yeah.
So you had a ton of friends.
Yeah, I had friends, and I had guy friends, and they were just gone. I didn't have any of those guy friends anymore. So fast forward to our wedding day, we have a 2-day wedding celebration. So the first night of our wedding, we had this girl best friend, and I had a hard time accepting that, but I trusted him, right? So he begged me to make her a bridesmaid. So I did, even though I did not know her. And then on our wedding, like the day before our wedding, we're having a ceremony, and then she went to take a picture with us, and he went ahead and gave her a kiss on the cheek during the picture we were taking while I was standing right next to him. And when I tell you, I felt so disrespected because on any average day, like the relationship I am in right now, if he were to do that, I totally get it because he would be allowed to do that, right? But the fact that he made it such a big deal to like keep strict boundaries with people of the opposite sex, and for him to kiss her in front of everybody.
On your wedding weekend.
Thank you, right? So I went upstairs and I was just like, we're not getting married. Fuck this. Fuck you. I started like pushing him, and like I started screaming upstairs, and I'm sure everyone could hear. And then eventually he calmed me down. He talked me down, and we went back downstairs like nothing happened. So there was just so many of these little incidents, and there was just this pressure of like, this is our wedding. So many people are here. Like
everybody's watching.
So just shut up and get through it, right?
I feel like a wedding is like an unstoppable train. There's this feeling that you can't get off even.
But you can.
And we have a friend who's been on the show who she got married to a horrible guy as well. And she is the friend that whenever somebody gets engaged, she pulls them aside. She's like, are you really excited about this?
Because if you're not, we can just like take off right now.
We're out of here.
People need to know that they can.
Yeah. It feels like you can't. I mean, especially when you're like in the weekend or like everything's been booked and the deposits have been put down.
Exactly. I was not going to be stopped. I could talk about 10 more incidences where things were just off, Yeah. But we did end up getting married, and all his friends that drove down, we actually took a whole road trip back to LA. So it was like a 3-day road trip in a big van with me and all his friends. And I felt like I was bonding with them really well, and I felt like really loved. Like the first few days were just magical. It was also very emotional because I was leaving my family behind, and it was just hitting me.
Yeah.
So I was just very, very tearful. I was crying. I was like happy, but I was like really crying. Like I felt like my body was telling me like, something's wrong. I don't think you're making the right choice.
Right.
But I just kept choosing to ignore it and saying that, oh, it's fine. Like it's an emotional time, whatever. We moved into his parents' house in California because he didn't have a house yet, and they were basically living in a mansion. So I'm like, on the hills. This is perfect.
I'll move into your mansion.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm like, me in your son's Porsche. Yeah, like whatever y'all want. And they had a jacuzzi, they had a pool, they had a slide. I was just living my epic dreams of everything that I wanted to. And then slowly reality started setting in. He would be DMing other girls in front of me, and I'd be like, that's flirting. He's like, that's not flirting. That's just how I talk to them. Just a lot of stuff like where I felt like he wasn't being emotionally faithful to me. And we ran through a lot of problems, but I thought, like it's a transition in our lives. Of course, there's going to be some problems. I just kept brushing off. And I got close to his family. I got close to his younger brother and all that stuff. And his mom was just extremely welcoming. Just from day one, you're my daughter now, like overly welcoming to the point where I'm like, oh, this is like a fairy tale.
She's love bombing you too.
The family's love bombing you. Do they know what's wrong with him?
They are love bombing me. And to give a little background of his mom, of who I knew she was like 5 years ago, was, she was raising 3 kids. They were all very young, like 10, 11, 12, when their father died. I think about a year or two later, she got remarried to a man that was twice her age. But he was loaded, and he was the only one willing to marry, like in Bangladesh, somebody who was divorced with kids, right? Because no one wants somebody who's divorced, obviously, back in Bangladesh. And so she got remarried. I think it was more of like, I need somebody to take care of me. And then they moved to California. And so his stepdad was, I think, in his 70s, and his mom was in her 40s or 50s. So there's a huge age gap, but she was very, very welcoming to me. And I do believe that she had also been abused, at least in her past marriage. Right. I don't think she really knew love marriage or anything like that. I think both her marriages were just out of duty. With that being her background, she really welcomed me. She had 4 sons, and so I'd be the first daughter. And so I think in that aspect, she really like welcomed me in and all that stuff. So it was only like 3 or 4 weeks after we had got married that one night I'm going to bed like any other night, and I fall asleep. And in that time, from what I gathered, he had actually taken my phone and uncovered my old messages from before we were together, before we were even talking in like the last summer, when I remember I told you I was dating around and stuff like that. He found all these flirtatious messages with other guys that I had met with. And
before you met him?
Before I had met him, before we had gotten together, before we were official. We were possibly talking, but he saw the messages and just completely like blew his top completely, to the point where I woke up to being choked. And woke up in like your most vulnerable state. You're laying next to your husband at night, like you're the most comfortable, safest spot in the world. Woke up to him strangling me, and then just him, you're a slut, you're not who I thought you were, like you fucking whore, everything you could throw at somebody when you're like angry, right? And in my head, I'm like, what did I do? What did I do? And I could barely talk because I was trying to get his hands off me. And then he took his hands out. He's like, what do you have to say? What do you have to say? And then obviously the rest of like the next 5 minutes was him just like beating me up. And after he was done, he just kind of sat up and he was like, look what you made me do. So after he had said that, he just got up, he just walked out, he went downstairs, and I'm just like sitting there just in shock in bed, like what had happened. This fight, and freeze. And I completely froze. It was just a complete like out of body experience. I remember like even when I talk about it now, it's like I'm like standing in the corner of the room watching it instead of feeling it. I don't remember feeling it. So I was completely frozen. And then he walks back up with an ice pack. Here, this is for your eye, because he had punched my eye and it was already like bruising, right? He just casually gave me the ice pack and just went back beside and laid down next to me.
Like this is a normal everyday.
Like he had definitely done that before to other girls. This was nothing new. He wasn't surprised. He seemed so calm about it. And
no remorse.
No remorse. And I just kind of laid back down in bed, like what just happened? And I just laid there and I just fell asleep.
Did you know what he had found? Like,
yeah.
Okay.
He was talking to a certain certain guy a month before that I had met him. Right.
Okay.
Yeah. Because I knew exactly. So I'm like, yeah, I did it. I did it. I'm so sorry. I don't even know why I was apologizing. It was before him, right? Obviously very jealous, very angry man. I woke up the next morning and, this is like kind of, and I've talked about this in my TikToks quite a bit. And this is the morning where like I woke up and I went into the bathroom and it just hit me like what had happened. My neck, I had marks, I had bruising, I had a black eye. And I was just like looking at myself in the mirror, like, who is this person? I was completely dissociating. And in my head, I'm like, okay, what do I do? So I text my friend. I'm like, oh my God, I think I made a mistake. But I didn't tell her that I had just been physically abused. She was just like, no, girl, I think it's really normal to feel confused right after you get married. Hang in there, you got this. And I'm like, you're right. You're right. Shit happens in marriages. It's fine. It had literally just been 3 weeks. I was just like, what is this blip in my fairy tale that's happening right now? And I looked at myself and I'm like, okay, you know what? Let me just put some makeup on. I'm going to go downstairs. Like, I'll figure it out. And I just needed some time to think. His mom was literally downstairs calling for my name to come eat breakfast. Right. And so that was like when I had to make the decision, like, was I going to cover it up or was I going to go downstairs and show everyone what had happened? And I think I remember looking at myself in the mirror and telling myself, this can't be my life. You are 22 fucking years old. This cannot be your life, Annesa. And I kept saying that to myself. And I'm like, I'm just going to go downstairs. So I just put some clothes on and I went downstairs and I sat at the table. His mom was like making food. And she's asking me how I am. And I'm like, just giving her like little replies, like not really looking at her. Right. And she was looking at the part of my face that wasn't bruised. So I was kind of looking away from her. And then she sits down. And we start eating and she takes like a good look at me and instantly she's like, what happened? I didn't say anything. I felt like if I said anything, I would just start crying. I didn't say anything. And he goes like, did my son do that? I didn't say anything. And instantly she knew that obviously he had put his hands on me. And so right away, she's like calling for his name, like, come down right now. Like, what did you do? And like, she starts backing me up. Like, how dare you? Why would you ever do this to a woman? This is not what I raised you to be. And she was furious. And then his stepfather came in, chimed in, furious, like, how could you? What the hell? Like, what's wrong with you? And he said the words that I will never forget. He said, you should be lucky that she's a Bengali woman, because if she was white, she would have called the cops. And in that moment, I'm just like, wait, what? Like, you guys are just trying to make sure that I don't report him.
Yeah, like they don't look bad.
That's it. Like, you're gonna scold him, but y'all don't care. Y'all just trying to like make it seem like y'all have my back so that I don't talk.
Right.
And yeah. And I also thought for the first time in that 24-hour period that I had the option of calling the cops, because after it had happened, it wasn't in my brain to call the cops. You know what I mean?
Who thinks about calling the cops on their spouse? Like, you just don't think of that.
And you're in shock.
And 22 years old.
Married.
And you've just gotten married. You're living in a new city with people you don't know. I mean, right. Yeah.
And the fact that it was my stepfather at the time where I realized, shit, that's an option. Oh my God, that's an option. And it just blew my mind.
Some women would call the cops in this situation.
Right. I'm like, what the fuck? You're right. He just beat the crap out of me. I could have called the cops. I should have called the cops, right? I would have had a lot bigger case if I had done that. And that's why I talk about calling the cops all the time. I get why women are scared to do it. I've been there. But he said that. And that was like the first shock where I'm like, wait, that didn't sound right. And then my ex-mother-in-law, she forced him to apologize. And he did. He apologized. And I'm like, okay, thank you for apologizing. And then she gives me a hug and she goes, you know, there are just some things we go through in marriages, but everything will be okay. So I'm just like, wait, what? Everything will be okay? Like, you want me to forgive him? You think we're going to move past this? Like, what happened to defending me and now being like, we'll get through it as a family. Like, don't worry. I got your back, girl.
I mean, there's no way that she hadn't been beaten the crap out of at some point in one of her marriages. I assume
she had been abused at some point to be able to say something to another girl, especially like a younger girl, like, it's okay. These things happen in marriage. There's things you have to go through and move past. And it'll make y'all stronger. And I remember like I was just feeling so confused, so lost, not knowing what to do. I asked him like, why did you do this? And he straight up told me, you know, at the time, Annesa, I really felt like you deserved it. But I do apologize for raising my hands at you. I'll never do it again. And, you know, it was just a lot of back and forth and me threatening, I'm going to leave you. But really, I just wanted him to fight for me. I didn't want to leave. You know, I was still very much in love with him. And I had this like trauma bond with him too, right?
Yeah.
He's my protector in this new city, in this new life.
I don't know anybody else. Where am I going to go?
I don't know anybody else. And anyone that I've told about you has just said, we'll get through it as a family. This is the perfect opportunity to practice patience. and to really show your love for your spouse. And I
Yeah.
feel like so many women have gone through this time and time again. Just keep quiet and make your husband happy and all that stuff. And, you know, it had been about a day. I'd been pretty upset, pretty sad, pretty depressed. And I had decided, okay, he did it once and maybe he won't do it again. So I'm just like, okay, I'm just trying to see what our future would look like. And the morning after it happened, it was nighttime again. And his mom was like, oh, no, you need to sleep in the same bed as him. The only way you guys are going to get past this if you just move forward quickly. So she forced me to lay in bed with him after the incident the night before. And I was, again, super confused, but like, okay, like she's kind of my guardian now. So I'll listen to her. I'll give it a shot. She has more knowledge about marriages than I do, right? So I'm perfectly playing into this scenario. And, you know, the next morning, I'm just texting my dad and he told me, hey, I'm going to send over your car. What's the address? I'm like, hey, you know what? Don't send it just yet. Something was just telling me not yet. And I remember about like 5 minutes later, my ex just came up to me and just triggered and mad again about everything he remembered, all the text messages he remembered and all the guys he remembered. And he came up and he just slapped me across the face again. And I remember thinking like that slap probably hurt a lot more than the whole beating incident the night before, because it felt like I had given him that permission to slap me. Right. You know, fool me once, shame on you, fool me twice, that's all on me. I feel like I gave him the perfect opportunity to abuse me yet again. That slap, I think, slapped all the sense into me finally. Mm-hmm. And that night, I called my sister on the phone, just crying. And she was just like, hey, what's wrong? I'm just like, I just miss y'all so much. I miss my life. I want to come see y'all. And she was just like, of course, you can come visit us whenever you want. Let me know. I'll like buy a plane ticket for y'all. And I'm like, I just really miss y'all. And I just kept crying. And she's just like, okay, you don't like us that much. Relax.
What's going on?
The hell's going on? And I could not utter the words. I could not tell her. And she kept, why are you crying? What's going on? Are you safe? And I kept crying. And there was like a pause. And she was like, did he hit you? Like, it's so weird, like sister's intuition, like, I don't know. And I just kept crying. And she just like stopped talking. She was so upset. And she basically was like, all right, well, here's your plane ticket. You're going to come see me tomorrow. Like, without me confirming any of her suspicions, she's like, you are coming tomorrow. Yeah. Get on the flight. This is the time. You're going to get on it no matter what. And, you know, I hung up the phone and I said, I'll think about it, right? And that whole night, I'm just like, I'm not going to go. I can't leave like my new life. I need to figure it out. She doesn't understand. This is my marriage. You know, I was having all these thoughts and I went and talked to his mom. I'm like, hey, like my sister wants me to visit tomorrow just because I didn't tell her anything. I promise I didn't tell her anything, but she just really wants me to come visit. And his mom was like, no, you can't go because then they'll start asking questions and they don't know the full story. You know, he didn't mean it. You can't go right now. Maybe go after you heal. And I'm just like, oh, okay, maybe you're right. And it was kind of like a split second where I'm just like, I promise I won't tell them anything. I'll wear makeup. We'll be fine. Just let me go. And she's just like, okay, if you think that's a good idea, you can definitely go. And I had decided I was going to go like 2 hours before the flight. And he's like, I'm going to come with you. So I think as an added measure to like, she better not out me, you know? And so he got on the plane with me. And in that plane, I remember us having this conversation like, we're going to work through this problem. We're going to come out even stronger. We still wanted to be married. And that was our decision on the plane, you know? And at this point, I was still so severely scared of losing him. But at the same time, I feared the shit out of him. I was scared of him. It's this balance between I'm afraid of him, but I don't want to lose him.
That's the trauma bond, right?
That's the trauma bond. And we landed in the Austin airport. So when I got into the car, my whole family came to pick me up. They were so excited. And it was very dark, so no one could see anything. Right. So the car ride home was like me talking to them, and my sister was just quiet. She didn't say a word to me. The car ride home, and then as soon as we got to the apartment, she just went straight into her room. And I'm just like, that's so weird. And at this point, I had healed a little bit, right? So I wasn't as blatantly like black eye. I was just still a little red, just a little bit of bruising. And I like followed her into her room. I'm like, hey, Apu. And Apu means older sister. Like, hey, Apu, like, I'm here. And then she takes a good look at me. She goes like, what's that on your face? And then obviously I was I'm like, yeah, like you were right, like it did happen. And instantly she just broke down in tears. It's so sad to think about this. She just broke down into tears because like she's my older sister. And then my mom walks in and my mom sees what happened, and my mom just like completely breaks down, right? This is like the hardest part of the story because like my family like blamed themselves, like we couldn't protect you from this. It's our fault too. We should have fought harder into like not accepting this marriage. And right then and there, that's when all hell broke loose in the household, because then my brother-in-law came in, and then finally he walks in. Everyone's in attack mode, like ready to fight him. Like, what the fuck are you doing? And he's like, well, you don't know the shit that she did before. And they go like, we don't care. We don't care about anything. Who gave you the right to do what you did, to raise your hand on our daughter, right?
Right.
And right away, he was trying to defend himself, and they just kicked him out of the house.
Mm-hmm.
They didn't give him time to wear his shoes, gather his belongings. They just kicked him out, locked the door, and said, just fucking go back to where you came from, because you're not staying here for another second. And then in that moment, I realized that I had lost him for good. Like, I realized he was gone. So like I was crying because obviously this terrible thing happened to me, but I was also mourning our relationship because I knew now that my family's involved that I wasn't going to see him again. So it was a very confusing night for me. And, for a couple of days, I was very, very quiet around my family because I didn't want them to know that I wanted to go back. I wanted to go back with my whole heart. I wanted to fly back to California and give it another shot with my whole heart.
Well, you had this whole dream life that you were planning to have with him.
Right.
So you're mourning the loss of what you thought it was going to be.
Exactly. And it's so hard to imagine being outside of it. Like, why do you want to go back? You're just going to get hit. From my end, I had so hard time explaining that I really wanted to go back.
Yeah.
But as soon as they had kicked him out, they took me straight to the ER. I got a workup. So this had been about 48 hours after the incident had happened. I got checked out. I had a very swollen, restricted neck, and luckily there was no fracture on my skull or anything like that. But they documented everything, every little bruising, everything. When I got into the hospital, into the ER, and was being so nice and compassionate, and they were being like, oh, I do have to let you know that we do have to call the cops in this situation. So, I saw it. The cops came in, and I was giving them my story, and they're just like, wait, this happened once? They were just shocked. They're like, wait, you're telling me this happened once and you came to the ER? I'm like, yeah. They're like, we don't see people like you here. We see people end of their life, 20th beating here. And I'm just like it was just getting worse and worse. Like my heart was breaking more and more because they were giving me a glimpse into the life that could have been me, right? And I was talking to the police and I'm like, wait, so this happens often? They're like, you're a 6 dB call of the night. Broke my heart, changed my entire outlook on this thing. It happens to so many women. It's so upsetting.
Yeah, to be in that situation and hurting as much as you were, and then for the police to say, oh, you're the 6th woman tonight. We've heard this from. Then you're like, holy shit, this is a fucking problem in our society.
Just chills down my bones.
Yes.
And the doctor was so nice. She was just like, I'm so proud of you for doing this. And I'm like, okay, yeah, I'm doing the right thing. This is great. Little did I know that I was technically collecting evidence, and I hadn't realized that. By going to the ER, I was building up a case for myself. I just thought I was going in to make sure I had no major injuries, but I was building a case for myself. So that night when I got home from the ER, with my family, I decided that I was going to report it. I was going to file a police report, and whatever happened, but I decided to do it. And this is definitely with my family's help and all that stuff.
Yeah.
My family did not talk about domestic violence. It was not talked about in our community at all. It was something, women getting divorced is already taboo enough, but let alone speaking out about domestic violence. We didn't do that in our community. We had no one to turn to. We didn't know how to handle it. We didn't know how to talk to lawyers. We didn't have any money to get a divorce. So this part took a village. I had so many people come in, fly in to help me, give me advice, and eventually we figured out like how to file the police report and how to get a lawyer and how to get a divorce and all that stuff. It took 15 months to finally get a verdict.
So like 3 times as long as you knew the guy.
3 times as long as I knew that guy. I was married to him for 3 weeks, and our divorce was final after a year. I didn't realize, like, you hear about like having to say your story over and over again, but when I tell you, you have to say every detail, every punch, every bruise. You have to tell it over and over again, whether it's like the police officers, and then it's the detective, and then it's your attorney that you got to tell. It was just absolutely painful. It was dragged out. Like, you want to move on, but then every few weeks you get a call from your attorney, or you get a call from, like, and it's just like, wow, over and over and over again. It took them 8 months to find him. So he had actually left California. We couldn't find him.
Was his family still there? Or did they all like up? I mean, that's crazy.
They all just like, no one said anything.
They're like, oh, we don't know where he is.
Right.
So he left California because he knew what was going to be coming his way, probably.
This is probably one of the shittier parts of the story, but he was actually already pursuing other women.
Of course he was.
Yeah, of course he was already pursuing other women. And I found this out actually after I started posting about social media. All these women turned up in my DMs like, hey, I know who you're talking about. He actually also abused me too. And hey, are you talking about so-and-so? Because actually this X, Y, and Z happened. And I'm just like, so he was a serial predator. He had raped multiple women. He had beaten a few of them.
Had he married anybody else?
He had not been married yet.
Okay.
And the craziest part is that all these women that would come up to me had my profile. So young, hijabi, Bengali women, like he had a type that he would serially go after to, you know what I mean? He was a serial sexual predator, basically what he was.
Yeah.
Well, and I think likely because of what like his stepdad said, like a Bengali woman won't say anything because it's not spoken about in your community.
Yeah. Exactly. And when I found all that out, I realized this wasn't a fairy tale. I was just on his list of victims is all it was. And I slowly started to reframe how I thought of the whole thing. And that luckily helped me move on quite a bit. But his family like hid it all, I'm sure. And there was a point where his dad called my sister and he was like, is there any way that we can get her back? We'll keep her safe. Is there any chance that she'd be willing to come back? And my sister was like, no, what the fuck? What the fuck are you saying? She's not coming back to you ever. She's not even going to speak to you.
Yeah.
And he goes like, okay, well, is there any amount of compensation that we can give her to keep her quiet, right? They're offering me $25,000 so that I wouldn't report it to the police. It was straight out of a movie.
And had they done that before?
They absolutely had.
Right. So they're accomplices. And my sister was like, not. In my head, I'm like, oh my God, Abu, we need the money. Like, this divorce is already costing like $10,000. Like, we need it. And she's just like, no. We're taking this to court. And if we take the money, we're going to lose our case. Like, my sister was thinking ahead. You know what I mean? I was thinking about like, right now, we really need it. Okay. I'm like, I'll take it. We already reported him. Let's at least take the money. And I actually did find out. So I had separated from him January of 2018. And by February of 2018, he was already on dating apps, meeting other women at that time. I was like mourning our relationship. He was already like getting more prey, right? And a few of those girls reached out to me saying, hey, like, yeah, he wanted to get married really quickly. You know, I was a virgin at the time and he took my virginity. And then I found out about what he did to you, and then I ended the relationship. And I'm just like, wow, he didn't waste any time. And then I think it was around May of 2018, so about 4 months after we had separated, he had actually already made plans to marry another girl. And so, you know, when my family found out, they had reached out to that girl's family and was like, do not let this happen. This guy is a predator. He's physically abusive. He is still married. Please don't let this happen. And her family was like, oh my God, thank you so much. We had no idea. And finally, my sister reached out to the girl, right? And basically the girl was like, I had no idea. Thank you for telling me. And then a few days gone by, and then she actually messaged me on Facebook Messenger. I wasn't doing any of the communicating.
Yeah.
right? But she messaged me personally, and message was the gist of, you don't know our relationship. I appreciate you looking out, but he's not the same guy that he was with you. So I'd appreciate you just leaving us alone and stop harassing me and my family. And I was at work at the time, and I just broke down at
Oh,
work.
that's one of those notifications you do not want to see come up.
No. And, in that moment, like, you have to realize that you can't help everyone. You can't warn everybody. And like, I realized, like, I was her like 6 months ago. I was her.
Yeah.
I was fighting everybody to be with him. I was not listening to nobody. Like, she's already too far into it. So for my own peace, I had to just let it go. I deleted the message. I blocked her. I couldn't deal with it anymore. And I realized, like, you can't help somebody that does not want to be helped, right? And the only reason I got out was because my family physically got me out.
Your family is badass. Everybody needs a family like your family.
I always say they physically got me out, and then eventually my emotions caught up,
Right.
you know?
Right.
Then 15 months later, this is March of 2019, I had to go into court in San Diego because he kept pleading not guilty. He pled not guilty twice to the point where it progressed into a physical testimony in front of a judge. That was a very traumatic experience because obviously I had to face him again. I went with two of my best friends. I didn't really want to go with my parents. I kind of wanted to just go with people I felt super comfortable with that I could look into in the courtroom when I wanted to look at him, but look at them instead. So they accompanied me into the courtroom, and I sat there and I was like, I met my lawyer, and he coached me through how to say certain things, and it was time to give my testimony. And I'm like, I'm going to be like this badass that goes into court and, when he convinces everyone of what happened. But I choked. And then for the rest of the testimony, my voice was just shaking. And I think it's because I knew he was sitting right across the room, just staring at me.
Yeah.
And I
Yeah.
hadn't seen him in 15 months, So I didn't make any eye contact with him. I kept looking at my friends, but I just knew his stare was there. And then in one moment, I looked over at him just for a second, and he was just smirking at me, like nodding his head like, bitch, you're a liar, gaslighting me to this day
Yeah.
over what had happened.
Yeah.
Luckily, I said my testimony, and then I was able to exit right after. So I didn't have to look at or do anything else. And I was taken into another room. And then the strangulation expert came, and she, looking at the marks on my neck, she said her piece, and a few other people said their piece. And then a month later, I got the call that he had pled guilty. And unfortunately, it's not the victory that I feel like I deserved, just because he got off really easily. He pled guilty. He avoided jail time. He got 2 felonies. And I know that stays on your record permanently, but he pled guilty only because he knew that if this went to trial, he would 100% be going to jail, right? There's no jury that would believe him. I had pictures. I had medical proof. It happened. So he got off really easy. They didn't fight for me any more than that. They're like, okay, well, we gave him 2 felonies, so we're good. Case closed. So it was like a win, but also a lose at the same time. But that was finally when I started to like get closure. This is over. It's in the past. I can finally move on with my life.
Yeah. So did you feel stuck during that 15 months?
I felt so stuck. I felt like it was my whole personality. I couldn't get it out of my head. I kept thinking, what was happening? What's going to happen? How is it going to end? Am I ever going to get justice? Am I ever going to get over this? Like, it was my whole life, it was my whole personality, and it was always in the back of my head. I was so fragile. There had been so many times at work where I was working, and then I broke down and I was sent home because the thoughts were too much. It was consuming for so long until finally it wasn't. And it was done. And I would do it 100 times over. You know what I mean? Because I feel like I was the first girl who spoke up in his line of God knows how many women. And I think, like, even if the girl that he's with right now, even if she doesn't believe him, there's a piece of paper saying this is what he did to you and these were his consequences,
Right.
So that's what I think gives me the biggest kind of happiness from it, biggest piece of closure from it. But that was the story, and I feel like that's kind of where I began the next part of my life and my healing journey, and just like this life that I've created after. And it's so crazy to believe it's about to be 5 years you
Yeah.
know? I remember after it happened, I could barely get through every hour, right? Get through 10 minutes. If I can get through 10 minutes, I can get through 20 minutes. And you just get hour by hour. And I remember thinking, like, I just want it to be a couple of years. I can't do this anymore. I don't want to deal with this anymore. And now it being like 5 years, it's just like, you really did that, Annesa. You did it. You go, girl.
Yeah.
What's really interesting about that is somebody, I don't know, shared on social this like post-it note of, 5 years ago, you only dreamed you'd be where you are now. And like for me in my position, I was like, where are all my widows at? This is this like super triggering. Is this horrible? And we all like, yeah, it was. And then it's amazing to be talking to you because you're 5 years out and this is a dream where you are right now.
It is.
This is all you could have hoped for at this point from where you were then.
Mm-hmm.
It goes to show, like, you don't really have a good view of life. I've grown up, I was 21, 22, now I'm 27, 28, getting into my 30s. And it goes to show that I had so much learning to do. I was
Yeah.
so focused on this one small part of my life. Like, I had to get married. I just wanted some freedom, like these little things. And I'm like, I have an abundance of that right now. And my life is so different from what I thought it was going to be. And it's just so much better in every single way. So
Right.
it's so much growth. It's not just coming of age too.
So throughout your healing, you mentioned that it's through a lot of therapy that you are
Mhm.
where you are now. What are some other things that were helpful for you
Mhm.
processing through everything and getting you to this place where you are now?
So definitely, yeah, like the therapy thing. I had never done therapy before. It really helped me realize that it wasn't my fault. And that was first key to me accepting and loving myself, was that it wasn't your fault. You were raised a certain way. You saw your dad scream at your mom your entire life. And so when he screamed at you, you assumed this happens in marriages. That's why you didn't stop it at the yelling. And I didn't realize that this was learned behavior because of the way that I was raised and what was modeled to me, that this was somewhat okay. So taking that blame off myself was just huge. And luckily for me, that came through therapy. I also went to a lot of group therapies. I went to this one retreat where it teaches you a lot of meditation, a lot of yoga, and just how to
Mm-hmm.
regulate your body without medication. And I actually did go ahead and see a psychiatrist who also prescribed me medication because luckily my sister like opened up her home to me. She had a 7-month-old. She was living in a small 2-bedroom apartment at the time, and all that was available was her couch. And I gladly took a couch because I was so traumatized by a bed that I couldn't sleep on a bed for 3 months. So I was sleeping on my sister's couch for 3 months straight, and I couldn't get out of the couch some days. And I'm like, I know I have to find a job. Like, I know I have to figure out my life, but I can't do it. And it wasn't until I started taking medication where I was able to get the motivation to find a job and, get my life together. So medication helped me immensely.
Yeah.
I was also very much shy about talking to people. I felt so sorry for myself. I felt so pathetic that this happened to me. I felt like a fool. So I wasn't talking to any of my friends or family about it. I was really shut out. And it wasn't until I opened myself up to them and be like, I shouldn't be hiding this. If I want to talk about this, I should be able to talk about this because this very real thing happened to me. So me being more open about it was definitely a huge part of my healing. Just normalizing the conversation about what happened to me, about divorce, about court, criminal cases, like that was so huge for my healing. And lastly, just like moving out and being independent. When I gained my independence in the real world, as such as not living under my parents' roof, paying for my own rent, having a job, like learning how to pay my own bills, learning how like just the whole life works without your parents hovering over you every second. Just me gaining my independence made me realize that like I didn't need to get married to have freedom. I just needed that push to go out and be an adult and learn all these things on my own. And I made so many mistakes along the way. But gaining my independence, I think, was so key to me healing.
Mm-hmm.
Independence, therapy, medication, yoga, all of that stuff. I think it all together and slowly but surely I got the chance to experience new things and new opportunities, meet new people, and
Mm-hmm.
all of a sudden, like my trauma wasn't my entire life anymore. So
Yeah.
I think that was definitely like my healing journey.
Yeah. It's just so interesting when we hear stories from women that have been abused in some sort of way, the shame that comes with it, like the feeling like it's your fault,
Mhm.
it makes me so angry.
Because they do it in a way to make you feel like it's your
Yeah.
fault. Like, you
Yeah.
made me hit you. Your
Yeah.
behavior determined how I treated you. It was always
Yeah.
you and never their lack of control. So when you learn that, when you're taught that for so long in such a
Yeah.
very like high emotional relationship, it's so sad. It's so sad. And it makes me so sad it took me so long to regain that control, saying, that wasn't me, that was all you.
Well, I think also how you were talking about moving on your own and doing all of these things, like it probably really did wonders for like your own self-worth. And when you have like when you see yourself as worthy, you're then able to see, well, no, I'm worthy and I didn't cause that and I didn't deserve that.
Mhm.
Exactly. And that's helped me so much in just repairing my relationship with my dad, where like I stopped fearing my dad once I gained my independence.
Right.
It was more of like our relationship completely changed. When I go to talk to him, I'm not looking for his approval. And if I hadn't gone through this, maybe I would have never had this new relationship with my dad, you
Mhm.
know?
Well, I think it's interesting, like the way you described your parents and like their marriage and all of it in the beginning. It was just interesting that they had, in spite of the fact that it seems like their relationship was still very traditional,
Mhm.
that they really embraced like Western ideals and didn't want you to get married to this
Yeah,
person and then stood up for you so vehemently.
Yeah.
This
they
thing that it
did. They
sounds
did.
like is potentially quite common within your community because people don't speak out about it.
Mhm.
I think
I
that's really amazing and
Yeah, you're right, because I have to give my parents so much credit for the amount of progression that they have made. Like immensely.
Mhm.
I really didn't think they were going to have my back like that. Not the way that I was kind of raised, but to see them fight for me so much. And like, I know like we're not on the same page entirely, but the fact that they made sure I got a divorce, made sure I never went back. And then even when I introduced like my current fiance to him, they were very skeptical of him. They're like, from the beginning, they were like, no, 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 no. Like they were so skeptical because they're so afraid of like
Yes.
me getting hurt. And so it was
Yeah.
good skepticism this time. Like I completely understood. It took them a couple of years to fully accept him. Like Samuel, my current fiance, he's not Bengali, he's Indian. They're a different religion, completely different cultures. And for them to like be so progressive about, hey, if he makes you happy, we're on board. Is that concept is so wild. I could have never expected my parents to say that.
Yeah.
I have to imagine for you even trusting someone and deciding to put yourself out there and date again was quite the struggle.
It was quite the struggle putting myself out there. Like I saw red flags from a mile away now. Luckily, like I had the support and I had gone through enough therapy where I wasn't just gonna fall into another bad situation.
Right.
I feel like I was really set up for success after that because my parents did everything they could to give me any sort of therapy my way so that I could heal. They just wanted their daughter to feel better, right? And it worked because I could see, red flags from a mile away every time somebody rubbed me the wrong way or disrespected me. Like I was on high alert. And with my fiance, basically, we were really just good friends until the feelings developed over time. He was definitely the first guy that didn't try to pursue me the second they saw me. There's
Mm.
always that
Yeah.
chase. There was no chase. There was just like a slow, like learning to love him and get to know him. And I think that's really the reason why it worked out with him, because
Mhm.
I felt safe for the first time. And I didn't
Yeah.
think I was going to feel safe from a guy ever again. I was very much that against the idea of love. I didn't believe marriage was in the cards for me. I had just such a bad experience, obviously. And it took a while for me to realize that that was the trauma speaking. That wasn't really my heart speaking. So
Yeah. I wonder what the response like with your community in terms of being divorced. How did you find like with your extended family or like your church, were they accepting of that?
a lot of my family didn't really speak to me about it. Like my extended family, they never really reached out to me. like that. They always just kind of talk to my mom about it. It was still really hush hush. So I can tell like
Yeah.
people were very uncomfortable talking about it, and that led to my shame about it.
Yeah.
That's why it took
Yeah.
me so long to open up about it, because their shame transferred over to me, and I had so much shame around the topic because it was just so negative. It was never talked about in like a good for her. She got a divorce. She got the fuck out of there. It was more like,
Right.
oh, she got a divorce. Poor girl. Your life is over now. It was just a lot of that. I realized my status changed in my society. And then it was just like, wow, I grew up like trying to impress all these people my whole life.
And this is all
Like,
I
for
am.
what?
Yeah.
For what? They just threw me away like I was trash. So I think another part of my healing journey was just saying fuck you to the community and be like, I know what my worth is. I don't need y'all to tell me who to be with or what it is that I am.
What made you decide to be so public about this story in terms of like TikTok and Instagram and all the social media?
Definitely COVID.
Okay.
Super lonely. So I've always been the type of person, I've always been really creative. I've always made videos for fun. And then he was my boyfriend at the time, but Samil was like, hey, like, why don't you start posting on social media? Like, there's this new app. It's called TikTok. It could be a lot of fun. I think you'd be really great at it. You're super creative. So I got on the app. And then one day I was really struggling mentally. I was still dealing with it back in 2019. And I just decided to post a funny, like, humor video about just like being divorced and DV. And instantly, like, I had all these people just like come forward with their story and being like, I relate to you. And this was like the first time in 2 years where somebody related to me because they had gone through what I did.
And we're talking about it because there's people who have been victims of domestic violence that aren't talking to you about that.
Yeah.
They would not talk about it. And so I just felt like I felt so empowered because I had other people validate me that had actually gone through it. That was the key thing. They had gone through it. So I felt their empathy. And instantly I'm just like, oh my God, like I feel so powerful. I feel so great. I actually feel strong now, you know? Yeah. And then, you know, I started talking to all these women DMing me like hundreds and hundreds. And I'm like, oh my God. Like I was so alone, so isolated for so long. And there wasn't a single person who looked like me who could say they had been through what I had been through. And now there's hundreds of brown women in their 20s. Yes, I went through DV. Yes, this happened. Yes, I also went through court. I'm tired of being crying about this. I'm going to share it and I'm going to create a community. And over time, like the more I shared, just like the more people that I met, and it just kept me going. Like I started something and it kept me going. And it was a big part of my healing journey after I thought I had already like healed, right? Yeah. There was this new chapter in my life where I was healing even more through the stories of other women. And that's basically how my social media and TikTok and everything started. And I'm so glad that it did.
Well, you found community and you were able to feel less alone in your experience.
Exactly. And the amount of women that have reached out and said, I thought I was the only one too. You sharing your story really helped me realize that I'm not this pathetic loser in this community who got divorced. I have nothing to be ashamed of. And so many women like, I'm currently going through this. Your story gives me hope. I want to be a voice for those people who thought they were me, you know, who thought there was no one else like them and who had given up hope, who don't have the family to support them, who don't have the resources. You know, I got very lucky and I was very fortunate to do that. But like the women that are watching who have children, you know, who don't have a family nearby, what are they going to do? You know, but if they lose hope that it's over, you know, so at least hopefully I can give them some sort of hope that your life is worth pursuing outside of this.
Right.
There is so much power in sharing our stories, right? And it can be far reaching, as you've touched upon. The other thing you touched upon that I thought was kind of profound was this idea that we can think we're done healing and then still continue healing. Like it's not this start and finish where you're just like, okay, and now I'm done healing. Things can creep up. They can come up when you're not expecting them. Or all of a sudden, you know, someone reaches out to you and you're like, oh, wow, that felt good. Actually, I think I might have healed a little bit more there.
Mm-hmm.
And we hear that, I think, in a lot of stories that we've heard in the year and a half we've been making this podcast, is just how it's not finite.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You have to take a few steps back every time you step forward. That's the healing journey. That's how it goes.
Thank you so much for sharing your story with us. And, you know, as someone who's been watching you, and I know you're like, I hate when people say this, but like, as someone who's been following you for, I guess I've been following you for probably 2 years or something. I have to say that when you announced on social media that you had gotten engaged, I was very happy for you.
Congratulations.
Yeah. It just, and I'm sure that all of your fans who are following you had that same kind of feeling. And not that it's closure, but it's just nice to see that you are, I guess, in a healthy, happy relationship and learning to believe in that again.
Yeah.
Yeah. Because I mean, even for the longest time, I didn't think it was going to happen for me, you know, and I see it in all the comments, and I see it in everyone that's reached out to me personally. Like, it feels like genuinely like we are so proud to see this. And so many people have still said that gives me so hope that maybe I can find somebody, maybe I'm not worth this, you know, maybe I deserve a happy ending too. And this is a happy new beginning, right? And I feel kind of like that full circle moment after posting that. So I really appreciate you saying that. But thank y'all for having me.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks for listening to the Now What Pod. If you've enjoyed this episode, leave us a review. Your ratings and reviews help more people like you find our podcast.
Don't forget to subscribe and share this episode with someone you think would love it. You can find us on social media at the Now What Pod. Until next time, we're Tisha and Jen. Remember, your story matters and you do too.